Ilana Razbash, and this is Radio Architecture.
Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live on Radio Karam from the unceded lands of the Eastern Kulin Nation, right here in the Karam Swamp. As always, you can join the conversation and text us on 0493 213 831. We would love to have you with us and part of the conversation. Tonight, my guest and conversation partner is Dr. Sofia Colabella. She is an architect and senior lecturer in architectural technology at the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning of the University of Melbourne. As a registered architect with a PhD in architectural technology, she co-founded and co-directed 2 research-based architecture practices specializing in structural, acoustic, and interior design. Expert in timber lightweight structures and ecological digital design, she has designed and built several timber grid shells and acoustic shells for open-air concerts. Her research explores the intersection of social equity, ecological sustainability, and the contemporary reinterpretation of traditional technologies, spanning 4 interconnected themes. The first being inclusive and future-ready design practice, circular economy and circular design, upcycling waste in architecture, and innovative teaching approaches, all grounded in a broader commitment to advancing gender equity in construction. Since 2016, she has been developing cross-industry research projects on upcycling waste in architecture through experimental prototyping. Sofia is a member of the International Association for Shell and Spatial Structures, the AISS Hungai Prize Committee, the UAED Lab, and Sustainable Health Environments Lab. She's a member and co-founder of the Advanced Digital Design and Fabrication Research Hub. Welcome to the program, Sofia.
Hello, my pleasure, Ilana. Thanks for having me, and thanks for accommodating this online session.
A pleasure. Listeners can see, hi everyone who's also joining us live on YouTube tonight, that I'm broadcasting alone in the studio. You are dialing in. Do you know what country you're phoning in from tonight? What indigenous country you're based on?
Pardon, say again?
Do you know what indigenous country you're calling in from tonight? Are you at near the University of Melbourne, or you're in Wurundjeri country?
Wurundjeri country, yes. Yes. I'm there in Parkville. So, streaming from my office, basically.
So good to have you on the program. And it's a very busy time, of course, for my academic colleagues and researchers out there as the semester is nearing the end. So I'm so pleased that you are able to join me for a conversation. And I think our mutual interest in sound and acoustics will have so much to talk about. But as a listener of the show, I think you know what my first question is going to be. So I'm going to be a bit sneaky and ask you a slightly different one to get started. I'm wondering, why architecture?
Why architecture is an awesome question, because it was not my first choice.
Oh.
Yeah. My first choice as a child was I wanted to become a psychologist. But at the time, after high school, especially my mom was kind of not persuaded that was the best choice for me at the time. Psychology and all that branch of science was not considered as it is today, as useful as it is today. And so she was trying to push the second choice, there was architecture, but also the third choice, there was engineering. So basically there was an entry test for architecture, and so she played the part, okay, so you know what we can do, probably you can go and take the test and then decide later. It turned out that I took the test. I was kind of intrigued by the questions that were in the test. And so at the end of the day, it was very difficult for me to also move to Rome and therefore providing for myself. And so I decided, okay, Mom, let's go for architecture. I was very curious as a child. So basically, I loved the idea of architecture, drawing, creativity. I also loved the idea of engineering, so having more structured knowledge. I already knew kind of nuances between the two jobs. But the third one, that was my first one, psychology, actually has shaped as an architect and a practitioner. You know that psychology is a huge component of being an architect. So despite the fact that I didn't become a psychologist myself, I have been practice different methods for that.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
It's huge, isn't it? But behavioral psychology and human behavior in space is such a big part of what we do.
exactly. And yeah, so sometimes I wonder if it was not for architecture, then who knows, probably I would have found a way to just bring architecture into psychology at that point, since that was what happened to be.
It was your passion and it needed a way out, really. I think sometimes when it comes to your calling, you can't choose it. Your calling ultimately calls you in, doesn't it? And as certainly with architecture, for many of us, it is such a strong calling and such a strong passion. So there is a question I do like to ask all my guests, and I'm very much curious about what that would be for you. What is your earliest memory of a building or place?
And being one of your listeners, I know that that was coming as the only known questions. And I was trying to think, do I have, what is my single recollection? I said, I don't have one, a single one. And the reason being that I was born and raised in Naples. So my memory is rooted in the heritage buildings of Naples, where basically there are so many layers of history, from ancient Greek and Roman ruins, Baroque churches and plazas. So I mean, it's really, I was surrounded by architecture as a child, and it was difficult to pick just one. But then at a certain point, I thought, no, wait a second, I have one that is probably my earliest fascination. That is basically the ruins of Pompeii. I don't know if you know that.
Of course, and I was very fortunate to visit them myself during my productive gap year.
So basically, the reason why I thought about it is because as a child, I think that that was something completely different from buildings. And I visited the ruins when I was a child, and I was struck by the stillness and how an entire city had been frozen in time by the eruption of the Vesuvius in 79 AD. And everything was preserved by ash, by the way, home streets, even, and this is common knowledge, bread in the ovens. And so I think that for a child that was powerful and beautiful. And thinking about it, I think that was at the same time scary, but also it stayed with me. Especially because Pompeii allows you to look into the everyday lives of people who lived nearly 2,000 years ago. So something very far away. And still you could walk through their spaces, their homes, invading a privacy that normally we are not allowed to look into. But also read their graffiti, imagine their routines and so on. So rethinking about it, I guess that experience shaped somehow my understanding of architecture as something that is deeply human and narrative driven. And the other thing that came to my mind was that beautiful concert, the Pink Floyd concert performed there. I don't know if you heard about one of the best ever, 1971, live at Pompeii. Is
Wow.
one of the best Pink Floyd concerts. And the reason why I wanted to raise that is because it was filmed in an amphitheater with no audience, just the band and the ruins. And so the idea of music echoing through that space that was designed and thought for communal experience, but then it was performed in solitude was mind-blowing, extremely poetic to me. So um, somehow in the video, you can see that the amphitheater itself was part of the performance with the silence, the history, the acoustics. And so somehow, if I had to say, so why I think that could be a beautiful recollection is because of how architecture can frame and transform experience and how it's about collective memories. And collective memories is one of the pieces that I love the most about this Italian architect, Aldo Rossi, who wrote a book about this concept of preserving spaces and taking care of spaces because of the collective memory we hold, and so it's not only about what's listed as heritage, but also as, let's say, lay people, normal people recognize as a space that they own. And yeah, so that would be my recollection.
This beautiful memory, and even that intangible cultural heritage, the memory of an activity or the philanthropic or the cultural or creative work of an estate, that all comes into our intangible cultural heritage. As you were
Yeah.
describing Pompeii and taking me back to your memories, I was thinking about my own first encounters was with Pompeii and how it does indeed stick in our cultural memory globally of all of humanity, not just of Italy. I remember probably first learning about Pompeii through the painting, The Last Day of Pompeii. You can remind me the name of the artist who escapes me right now, that the embers of glowing Vesuvius are very bright in my mind. And then when I was little, an exhibition came to Melbourne of some of the
Oh,
Pompeii relics and cast models, the negative casts of the figures. And then later, I was
wow.
very lucky to see it myself, and it was the culmination of encountering Pompeii from afar through art, through exhibition, and then arriving in the city with so much anticipation, thinking, "Wow, this moment that is frozen, and what are they going to think of our civilization and our city in 2,000 years' time? What gift, what memory are we leaving?"
Yeah, the thing is that, this type of experience can be really inspiring for an adult, but I still believe that for a child it can be pretty much terrifying. The idea of seeing this environment and knowing the story and how that was frozen and eruption, and especially for people from Naples, that's quite relevant, especially because we had a strong earthquake in the 80s, and we were all terrified that that could happen again. So somehow Pompeii still tells a story that could come back again. We never
Mm.
know.
Vesuvius isn't fully dormant.
No, not at all.
Sometimes you
It-
get a bloom
it-
out of Vesuvius.
exactly, exactly. So yeah, that's the thing, and and then that probably would explain then your first question. It is kind of, even though I thought that architecture was not my first passion, I was anyway driven so much by that type of curiosity in terms of, and I was surrounded by these beautiful, beautiful buildings and the connection with the heritage and history, but also the way they were built one on top of the other. Many ruins still stay in some Baroque churches, for example. And if you go into the basement and to the area that then have been kind of brought to life again, then you can see the stratification of different ages. And for example, when the sea was at different levels, and so the position of the specific areas and roads, they all tell this story that is still visible there. And Alvaro Siza, few years ago, started a long process of this project that had gone through so many stop and go, because there were so many ruins that during the excavation of the sites of one of the oldest area in the city were coming up to life, and so And that's a beautiful intervention that once again speaks about the modernist approach to the archaeological ruins.
Becomes an immense process. You mentioned you studied in Rome.
No, I didn't. So if I had gone through the idea of pursuing a degree in psychology, I should have moved in Rome, and but my family was living in Naples, so I thought that if I wanted to move to Rome, I had to provide for myself, and so that proved to be a little bit complex because I wanted to be on time. I was also a swimmer. And so the problem was that I had to somehow uh, decide to drop something. And so I basically decided, okay, I will stay here. So I studied in Naples, and also my PhD, I did it in Naples as well. Uh, so yeah, basically also my practice. So up until a certain moment, I was living my life entirely domesticated in that dimension. And then in 2015, I decided to come here to Melbourne. And the funniest thing of all, I moved here. And 1 year after, I was invited by Professor Corentin Pivet, the École Polytechnique of Lausanne, the EPFL, which is quite famous, to join their research team to study upcycling waste in architecture. And so I had basically moved here. I had been living here for, let's say, 6 months. And then I thought, you know what? Let's go.
Back to Europe.
I decided back to Europe. Yeah. And I stayed there 6 months in Lausanne, in Fribourg, actually, where the lab was. And then after a while, I moved to Lyon because this pavilion that then we built out of skis was exhibited at the first Biennale of Architecture in Lyon. And so I was there because part of the program was to make this experimental structure in architecture visible to a vast majority of people. So the idea was also to demonstrate design for disassembly, and so how this pavilion could be disassembled many times during the exhibition. It was around 1 month in 3 different locations. And the funny one was that the final or the second, and now I don't remember, um, installation was in a mall. So basically, the organizer decided, okay, why don't we put this concept idea on the importance of not consuming too much and recycle waste in the temple of consumerism? And so let's go there. They got this space, and we had these people very much interested in this in this very odd structure.
Shopping centres are the cathedrals of today. The late Professor Peter Corrigan used to say as he lectured us.
Exactly. And that was really a super important experience. That basically, as you read in my bio, is one of the things that then I have carried through. So that was 2016, and basically somehow that was a sort of extension of my PhD thesis, but with a specific focus on a research question that was, can structural design enable the use of weak or unconventional materials? My thesis had a similar approach. In that case, it was small timber lath instead of discarded material. But the idea was that it was kind of an accent on structural design as something that can enable the use of materials that you wouldn't select as your first choice because they are not strong enough. But the history of construction tells us, especially the one that comes from ancient wisdom, that by using certain types and certain structural elements and compositions, you can actually achieve a very strong system. And one example was this beautiful Mannheim lattice shell designed by Frei Otto near Frankfurt in Germany. And in that case, consider that um, a span of 80 meters could be covered by 4 layers of 50 by 50 hemlock. So I'm talking about timber, natural timber, for a total section of 200 millimeter, covering 80-meter span.
Wow,
It's amazing.
that's
It's
immense.
just, yeah. And so the idea was to sort of use the same strategy, but in this case, using skis, discarded skis found in the landfill.
That's awesome. And it's quite, we'll absolutely share an image of this project for our listeners on Instagram after the broadcast. As always, you can
Yeah.
reach us at Radio Architecture. That it's so whimsical just seeing that structure out of skis. It is joyous to look at, actually. It's,
Yeah. Yeah, the thing is that I just want to tell you this other one. So the background story of the ski pavilion is that I am a fan of the concept that we all learn from failures more than we learn from success, and I'm very adamant about my failures. And in that case, the initial step that Corentin and I went through was, okay, let's submit a proposal for the Biennale in Lyon. And we were taking advantage of my expertise in grid design, but we wanted to do that with discarded materials. And so I was taking a very academic approach to the question. There was, what's the best sports equipment that I can use for this purpose? And without thinking about local waste, I thought, oh, obviously fishing rods. And so I designed this beautiful submission out of fishing rods because, fishing rods are exactly meant to bend. But it turned out that Swiss people are not into fishing. So I couldn't find a single fishing rod in landfill. So at that point, I thought, okay. At the same time, I could not withdraw the application at the Biennale. They were mad about it. They were so happy to have our pavilion and our idea and the concept behind. And I said, okay, let's go for it. So we took some time and then we thought, okay, what do Swiss people do?
skiing.
And they ski. And that was spot on because actually I was able to find in basically no time 300 discarded skis in the landfill, uh, probably in 1 week only. So it was
Wow.
it was super easy.
That's really hard to imagine, I think, for Australians. Right, you'd probably struggle to find 300 skis on Facebook Marketplace, let alone something as common as a landfill. Perhaps our equivalent is maybe broken surfboards in a coastal town. I
Exactly.
want to pick up on this idea of learning and lessons and learning from failure. What's the hardest lesson you've had to learn, or the biggest failure that you've had that's given you a lesson and it's turned out into a blessing?
Well, the probably I have plenty in different disciplines. So, for example, you know that I am both a practitioner and an academic, so I have failures in both realms. But also, as a carpenter, I also saw one of my timber structures fall apart, and that was probably the first. Yes, it was the first grid shell that with my business partners we built. And at the time we thought, oh, look, we are so smart. We are kind of on the on the right track to kind of experiment what Friot did in the 70s with a completely different shape. We are understanding the system. We are so strong, la, la, la. But we messed up entirely the timber species, the age. You need to have some sort of young timber to make it work, but also the fact that you need visual grading, so no notes, no defects. So there are a number of steps you need to undertake before even if you had gone through the structural calculation, that's not enough. And also the most important thing is that we had not studied enough the Mannheim lattice shell. And so basically we were punished by that, and basically the structure collapsed. And that was built for a client who we managed to persuade to have a grid shell in her backyard. And obviously we had to rebuild it with our own at our own costs. So from that moment on, we realized that basically we had to involve a structural engineer who could uh, eventually help us once the project was defined, because what we were very strong about was the design, drawing part, and the construction. And there was this missing part of the structural calculation. And so we then became very strong also on that, but somehow the assumptions we were making were not entirely correct. So probably that was very strong as a take-home message,
And probably,
because it implied also to rebuild it.
yes. And probably a painful lesson also to watch your baby in effect collapse. But I'm interested though. You mentioned as a carpenter, if you weren't involved in building your structures, do you think
Mhm.
they would be built, or do you think they would be buildable? How important is the maker creator element of these designs?
Well, that's a very good question, because actually, so there are two things. One was that at the time there was no, we had hard time to find someone who would take responsibility for building these structures, because there was no building code that could help us. So basically, we had to go through the entire process from explaining how to make a calculation and therefore deposit then the calculation. But the same applied at the beginning. So I'm talking about 2006. Now the story has changed, luckily. And so my one of my business partners and I decided, okay, we can become carpenters. We can take the basic diploma and go through that, and we did it because it was easier than asking someone
Wow.
else to, especially because you can teach someone to build or make something if you own the method. But we were learning the method, and so I wasn't able to explain, okay, so these are the steps, this is the framework, and this is the basically the timeline, for example, or you need to do this before doing that. I had to learn first, and then by learning the process myself, I could then establish the entire chain of action. But to the other question, that is how making is relevant to our job, I would say 100%. If I had to suggest a young architect what to do, I would say make it happen. Create it yourself. So prototyping is basically probably the most important thing, for many reasons. The first is that you test yourself, and so you test effectively if the idea is worth pursuing, the cost that is implying, especially when it's not a straightforward solution. So you need to have some backup plans. Also, when it's something really new, probably you need to also understand, okay, how it is then taken by my client or the public or whoever is going to then take your work. So I would say that that's super important in practice, but also for students. There is a lot that has been written. There is a lot of readings about how learning happens through making and learning by doing, and this is particularly true when it comes to architecture, because then they can mold things with their own hands and understand the space, the quality of the space, once they put one element on top of the other. And also the conversation today, for example, in the crits I was attending, I we were having very beautiful conversation, not only looking at the drawings that were pinned up on the walls, but also looking at the physical models that students had created. And sometimes things were not visible on the drawings, but some other qualities could stem from the models that they had brought. So yeah, it's absolutely 100%. And to be honest, this has also been my entire life. So I would say that my career has been built through a blend of practice, prototyping, and academic curiosity. So I think that this perspective that is not only dual, because it's not only academia and practice, but it's also becoming a carpenter. So trying to understand the work done by the ones that then you will give instructions on what to do is so important. Not only for the relationship that then you will be able to build, but also because it allows you to see construction as a creative tool and not only as a constraint, which is something that our students sometimes struggle with.
As a collaborative
Seeing
tool.
exactly. I love that.
I'm sensing
Uh,
a real entrepreneurial energy as well in the way you just get it done and get it solved and figure it out. And of course, early in this conversation, we mentioned what kind of waste is in abundance in Australia. And I realized that waste is actually wetsuits. That's probably something we have much more of than broken surfboards. It is disused, ripped up, and just old and unfashionable wetsuits. And I want to talk about your Remaker project, which Rip Curl are also in collaboration with,
yeah,
upcycling wetsuit waste.
yeah, that's whimsical as well. You said that about the skis, but what about the wetsuits?
They're quite whimsical. And initially, I looked at the images. I'm like, what is this pink fluffy thing? And then I realized I have one of those pink fluffy things. That is the inside of the Rip Curl flash bomb linings. They don't sponsor this program, but perhaps they should. And it's that inner waterproof warmth and fuzziness that also keeps surfers comfortable. Tell us about the project, but I think actually one question I want to ask before we get stuck into the nitty gritty is perhaps not all our listeners know what the circularity or circular economy is.
Yeah. So basically, circularity is all about a new way, or no, it's not a new, it has been here for quite a long time. And it's all about defining the way we can extend the life of the products, the materials, but I would say also the spaces that we use today for longer. Turning away from the idea that everything is disposable, but instead thinking about how we can repair and reuse over time. What I have been adding to this concept that involves obviously new ways of conceived design, but also new ways of detailing design through, for example, strategies like the now famous design for disassembly. That basically means something that has been branded as something new, but again, this has been forever in the ancient wisdom our predecessors. It basically means that if we can repair a component, that allows a longer life. And in the circularity circuit, this also means that probably even if you have to dismantle something, instead of thinking straight away, okay, let's bring it to the landfill, we can probably think about other strategies and other avenues where this material can be used. And somehow, what's a waste for a specific industry, especially when you think about the cross-industry collaboration pattern, can become a very important material for another sector. And consider that, for example, construction has an industry that is quite cheap if compared in terms of basic materials, if compared to, I don't know, sports equipment, for example. Under any behind any skis or wetsuits, there is an army of engineers that posting patents on how to make that thing faster, safer, more beautiful, fashionable. So there is much more investment there than it is in architecture. And if we're able to channel some of these materials that we can consider okay for being used in architecture, it's a win-win, because obviously the fashion industry now is getting closer to having better rules for making their own industry more sustainable, but at the same time they cannot get to zero waste, not now for sure, but even if you're very good at that, there would be still some materials that need to go to the landfill. The question is that possible to reuse that material in architecture, for example, and use it for a completely different purpose? So uh, probably I took a long way to answer your question, but partially also explaining some of the behind the scenes of the Remaker that you were asking.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, absolutely. I find it interesting also that the Remaker project is started in Fisherman's Bend. That's correct.
Yeah. So basically, in that case, the little behind the story of the Remaker and the wetsuit project is that remembering the failure of the fishing rod project, I decided, okay, now that I'm here in Melbourne, I will start by studying the National Waste Report, all of it. And I noticed that textiles in that case were flagged as a critical waste stream. So I wanted to find something that was not inherently construction based, because I wanted to pursue this idea of cross-industry collaboration. And so basically, with the textiles as flagged, I tried to find some industry partners, and through a lucky connection, Rip Curl came on board. And they were already doing great work with the repair centers and downcycling. But I wanted to explore something different. It was design-led reuse, but most importantly, upcycling. And the difference between the two things is that downcycle is a process that takes away some of the properties of the original materials or component to then add some energy production in some cases, and then transform into something else that is still useful. We're still keeping away the waste from the landfill, but there is energy involved, and also the quality of the material is diminished. Upcycling instead is a process where you can basically use the material as is and keeping the same performance that you had before. So I invited Katie Skillington, who is an expert in dematerialization and building performance. She is a lecturer here at APP, and she's currently on maternity leave. And probably I want to congratulate her and Jim for the arrival of baby Nina.
Whee, congratulations.
Yeah. Yeah, and basically we started together prototyping. So it went straight away. Rip Curl provided us with repair offcuts and end-of-life wetsuits. We received then an ABP development grant in October 2024, which helped us demonstrate this concept. That is, how surplus material from industrial processes could be transformed into architectural components for a specific sector. There was temporary retail installations and pop-ups like product stands and so on. So my idea was, for example, okay, Rip Curl is fine, but what about elk? The idea was, if in an expo you have to build some partitions to expose your products, why don't you use your waste to create the partitions so that the exhibition panels become the exhibition?
Oh, that's
So it
awesome.
was a yeah, that was the loop I was in. And at that time, so the research question became, can wetsuit scraps and waste be turned into architectural design solutions? And then we secured a second grant, the FP Ideas that you mentioned, to turn the underutilized Gamuda warehouse. So there was again a recycle and an upcycling into the upcycling into the FP Ideas Circular Design Collective at Fishman Bends. And that is a hub for circular design. So it's a place for experimentation launched in May by Nina Taylor, MP. And in that case, our task was to design a modular system of flexible partition units that could function as spatial dividers, furniture, storage. They were prefabricated here at ABP in the makerspace, and they were amazing, by the way, helping us and assembled on site in just one day.
Wow.
So we designed all of these in such a way that just one day we could get the job done. The finished surface was made from the wetsuit blanket that we call blankets. So basically cutting and sewing together the pieces. I must say that in that case, that was just the early on stage of the research. That was very much it sort of tailored um, uh, artisanal process. So it was not at all based on, for example, algorithms and computational design that would allow you, for example, optimization of the position of all the pieces together. It was based on our ideas of color matching or not color matching, and also the different thickness, because wetsuits, now I know, they have very different thicknesses.
Absolutely.
And so they became, each of these blankets became its own specific piece, where the team, so Katie and I were the investigators, and then we had 4 research assistants that who were helping us with sewing and the creation of the frames. And, these blankets were basically a brainstorming of, okay, let's put these pieces together, let's interlock the legs and the arms. So there is also some pieces that are just cut, just like the entire piece of a wetsuit that we wanted to recover with the zips and everything else. And the thing is that the installation is still there. So I would be happy for your listeners to go there and have a look of the whimsical idea. And in mid-December, we will disassemble the wetsuit walls and bring them back here in the makerspace. And then there will be a second life coming out. And because the idea is to translate those panels, those partitions, into acoustic baffles and panels for our timber workshops, which is quite noisy. So the idea is that we want to use that. That would be really exciting, because we will be able to test the performance, especially
Yes.
because as of now, basically the idea was that I wanted to make the waste, the recovery waste, visible to everybody, because of that behavioral change that we were talking about earlier. But in this case, once we transform these wetsuits walls into acoustic baffles, we can still move on the aspect of behavioral change and making the waste visible, but also to test if they work. And my idea is that they should be working, especially because of neoprene, that is quite a precious material in architecture. It's very expensive if you want to use it for example, for bridges, as it is the case sometimes. And that's one of the reasons why we don't use neoprene in architecture. Except for very rare cases. And having that for free is quite a luxury. So
That would be amazing
that's
to see the data and the testing results with those panels, and especially perhaps the woolly surface of the inside of those wetsuits would result in some interesting figures. But this is such a manual, such a craft based maker style project, right? And you mentioned there's no algorithmic process or computational design process behind trying to optimize it. I wonder, in the future of your work or the future of research, are you considering integrating or looking at AI to optimize these reuse efficiencies to do some of your patterns and testing for you? Do you see that that's actually a pathway towards success, or it, does it threaten the craft like process?
No. I totally think that we will implement that. So this was the first stage. So basically, as it happened when I was building grid shells by myself, before asking anybody else how to do the job, I had to learn it firsthand. The same applies with AI or computational tools. Before asking the agent or the computational tool to perform some high-level tasks, you need to know what to ask. Otherwise, the outcome will be just not good enough. So the idea of this crafty system that was time-consuming, and by the way, the skip of Ian was named "Waste Your Time, Not Materials," because we wanted to highlight the trade-off between time and resources when it comes to upcycling waste. And this is something that we need to understand and learn for our future. That if we're not able to make this trade with the construction industry, we don't have really a chance to make it happen in the real world of the construction industry. So through incentives, probably, we need to understand that there is a loss, and the loss is about taking so much time to make these architectures possible. In the future, yes, I want to do that. And I am already working towards different types of integration with computational tools and algorithms. The first is obviously working towards the digitization of the material. So the first problem that we generally have is to have a shape that can be translated into a CAD shape before it can be optimized by an algorithm, right? And for that reason, we are also talking with the Faculty of Engineering and the specific department of mixed reality and augmented reality in order to understand the before and after. Before is about having the data set that allows us to have a clear understanding of what we have and a clear translation into drawings. And the second one is kind of human machine interaction that would allow a faster assembly once you enter the domain of the human machine interaction. That would be the best option, but that's the next stage.
Some listeners may be familiar with the hologram technology, where it's effectively an augmented reality headset that allows you to see a blueprint effectively of what you need to piece together mixed with your real physical reality. So if a bricklayer needs to lay a really complicated wall, they can see the exact spot in virtual reality where they need to put that brick. Are you considering a similar tech, or if there's a new technology you can share with us?
Yeah, I'm considering exactly something like that. Now I understand. I'm not sure that hologram, they are still on the market, but anyway, there will be either them or some other products and software evolving in the space, and we will be certainly use something that allows faster construction. And here comes also the idea that basically I have been studying a lot of old technologies, and so community of practice, but also how it is possible to build innovative structures, like, for example, a large span architectures, just by using traditional structural systems. However, the problem is that if you want to be faster and somehow cost effective, if you use high tech tools like holograms. So if you combine the wisdom of ancient technologies and construction system together with the highest level of technology, for example, in MR or even AI, that can enhance the process so much so that it becomes available to everybody. The problem is that if it takes too much time or if it costs too much, it doesn't have a future. So our goal is to take now this experimentation, for example, the one with the wetsuits, and make it more visible in the real world of construction. It is constrained, obviously, by financial implications, for example.
And it's the labor cost and the labor time issue that we're really facing in the market in Australia.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question for you because you have such a detailed, fascinating research interest. If you could close your eyes, wave a magic wand, and pick any dream research question to investigate and to really solve, what would that be?
Well, it would be, I think now to be honest, I think I'm pretty much working into my dream research question. It is basically how to remove, for example, from the timber construction industry, the waste that comes from offcuts. And if you think about the role that digital design and fabrication have got in making architecture available. Think about Wiki House, for example, to almost to everybody. Now, I know that it's not that everybody is building their own Wiki House that was designed in order to democratize architecture so that everybody could just almost print their own house. However, there is an opportunity there, and if I had a my magic wand, I would certainly try to see if in that space there are tools to take away all their waste and use it for free to solve some of the social issues that we have in housing affordability. So I would combine affordability with the themes of upcycling waste, where I can see that there is. So I'm building up this research question with you now. I'm trying to, to really think about how we can not only not rely on raw resources, but also how to make it cheaper. So architecture can become cheaper if we use materials that has a low cost by definition, because if we go to the landfill, for example, and if we can turn down the time that is needed for this process to happen, the time that I just explained, then these materials can become almost cost zero. Is that possible? I mean, that's a dream. I would like that to happen at some point.
Oh, I feel one of our biggest challenges is the lack of investment in both manufacturing in Australia and the lack of investment in research and development.
Yeah,
How do we advocate to government policymakers to invest back into that and help us invest at scale? Because all these timber offcuts on site, perhaps you could shred them. Perhaps there'll be a new resin or a
yeah.
polymer one day that is safe and we're happy to use, that can create these amazing panels. We're on the precipice of people loving engineered naturalism and seeing those recycled materials. People love that aesthetic. Why isn't that we're not using what's available?
Well, this is a very long story, and I'm not sure that I can make it in 5 minutes. But the thing is that we absolutely need to inform current practices on one hand, because the main problem, especially when it comes to structural behavior, is that you need the materials that are reliable. And so, who is going to take responsibility for something that is unpredictable, doesn't have a clear history, how it was used, when, and so on? So there is a real concern there. But at the same time, we can also move away from the structural behavior for certain types of this waste in order to make circularity real. Um, the thing is that there is still a lot to do. So on the policy side, the safety regulations, which are essential, they present barriers to material reuse, basically. I think one way to overcome some of the barriers is that, for example, incentives can be a good way. And in Europe, that has been for a long time a way to cope with the idea of making circularity and more green architecture widely spread. And that's the only way, because we cannot ask just the construction industry to take the burden of this cost. So it must come from the government. And I think that there is one message: we have no choice. So, I mean, we arrived here with kind of not having a choice, for having a different approach to this problem. And it's a matter of bottom up rules and regulations that should force us into using circularity as a design tool, and the construction industry to have some incentives in order to make it happen without taking the entire burden on them. But it's been a cultural and operational shift to recognize the values of waste and existing material. Uh, on the other hand, for example, when talking with private clients, one pitch that one can make is that basically dematerialization, that is reducing the amount of material that will be used, often aligns with saving cost savings, right? So that's a good point. Less material usually means lower costs, so that's perfectly fine. But also design for disassembly, for example, can reduce long-term maintenance costs. So if you want to create a pitch to say, okay, let's go this way, there are many ways that can be framed. Future proofing, for example, is another good one, because we need to think about regulation that can be tightened around carbon emissions and waste. And so let's say that early adoptions of these practices can help clients think about the necessity to avoid compliance penalties, for example, down the line. But probably experimentations like the ones that we are conducting here, these are very relevant to create the necessity for this to become true somehow. So as long as there is a community that is happy to talk about it, happy to see these products coming up, and probably that's one of the first steps.
Well,
what do you think?
I think where there's a will, there's a way. That's the biggest theme and takeaway for me out of this conversation, and seems like very much the creative energy that fuels and guides your practice. That is very creative and very imaginative, as well as being highly technical and highly rigorous. And you're down on the sewing machines yourself if you have to be. I'm mindful of the time, so I will ask my last question.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that is, what gives you hope?
Well, I would say that what gives me hope is learning from failure. Just to finish as we started, I've come to see failure not as a setback, as I mentioned earlier, but it is a form of knowledge and an invitation to rethink, to adapt, and to grow. And that's what I always say also to my students. And when working with unconventional materials or circular design, failure is part of the process. It also teaches humility, resilience, and creativity. And to be honest, I also find hope in the next generation of designers and thinkers. And my students constantly surprise me with their curiosity and willingness to challenge norms. So those are probably the two things that are just beautiful to concept that everybody can resonate with.
I'll be sneaky. I'll get one more question in there. I'm wondering what's the biggest advice for your students, and what's the number one lesson you want them to learn?
Not to fail, failure, probably. That would be the first advice. And the second one would be start by making. Prototyping is not really just a technical process. It's a way of thinking. And it also helps shift perception from seeing components, materials, and the new challenge that we have in a very different way. And to see wealth into something that someone else could see as waste. So that's where creativity happens. And so, yeah, that would be probably my advice.
See wealth where someone else sees waste. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Sofia.
Thank you, Ilana. That was my pleasure.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karam studio on Bunurong Country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Will.
We're from Fishcatcher, and you're listening to Radio Karam.
You're tuned to Radio Karam, local community internet radio. This is Svi Belling, aka Z6,